Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? mRNA. It's the 4 letters that changed our lives. Short for messenger RNA, it powered the fastest vaccine ever developed. To many, this was a modern medical miracle that saved millions during the COVID pandemic. Today, mRNA is being studied as a potential game changer for some of our deadliest diseases, from cancer to diabetes, maybe even Alzheimer's. So why then do those same 4 letters spark so much fear, anger, and suspicion? A symbol of scientific hope, or the worst of Big Pharma, corporate capture, and a health system that puts profit over safety? Today, we unpack the calls to pull mRNA vaccines from the market and pass new laws restricting, even banning their use. Our guest today is Dr. Drew Weissman, who won a Nobel-Prize for his game-changing work on mRNA. We'll explore why his breakthrough is breaking down public trust in science and whether this backlash could derail support for promising future therapies and cures. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome.
So, man, we're excited about today's conversation. mRNA. It's like a 4-letter word. It's become a curse word. In addition to being this incredibly influential technology. Before we get into mRNA, we're going to tell you who we are. Who are we, Tom?
You are Brenda. I am Tom Johnson.
I'm Dr. Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark Abdamalik.
That's right. And this is Why Should I Trust You? And if you're new to us, we are a podcast that's looking at the collapse in trust in public health and medicine and science and trying to figure out a way that we can all come back together and survive.
That's right. A little bit later in the show, we're going to be joined by Dr. Drew Weissman. As we said, he was pivotal in why we have a COVID vaccine today with his work, along with Catalin Carrico on mRNA technology. He made this seismic breakthrough, but it is also a major driver of mistrust. And, guys, we just a couple of days ago, we dropped a conversation with public health leaders and a group of MAHA supporters, this time from Georgia. And we spent nearly the entire time on this topic. I mean, we talked about the COVID vaccine, but mRNA, those letters came up, and what it is, what it's not, how we define it, and how it moves so quickly from research into, shots in the arm, and what the consequences have been in terms of really just its legacy. And that episode is up. You can check it out if you haven't already. I think it really kind of serves as an important backdrop for today's episode. This conversation today is an important one. And before we bring in Drew, Tom, why don't you help us get our head around what exactly mRNA is? Because I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know that I can accurately define it. It's tough for me.
Yeah. It's like everybody knows those letters, but I'm not sure everyone has really kind of done the deep dive into what this technology is.
It's time for our How Did We Get Here with Tom Johnson and gang. Okay, Tom, how did we get here? Go for it.
All right. So what is mRNA? Okay, who has ever been on Snapchat?
Yeah, Maggie, you are the youngest and therefore the coolest. My daughter asked me to get on Snapchat and I always say no to her. But like Snapchat is the one, Maggie, like where you put something out and then it like disappears, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You send a message, a snap, and that disappears. So I want everyone to think about mRNA like a Snapchat message.
That's a good one, Tom.
That's a good one. Fine.
So we're going to beef this up, everybody. Don't worry. We're going to beef this up. We're not going to end with Snapchat.
mRNA is the Snapchat.
That's it. Here's
everybody.
Drew.
Hold on.
All right. So mRNA is a molecule that carries a message. It travels, it lands, it delivers the message, and then it disappears quickly. So in our bodies, these messages are sent out from your DNA. The DNA wants to express some feature, and it sends out a message to the protein factory of your body with the instruction to build this. It gives it the recipe, and all of a sudden, that is created in your body. So the idea with COVID vaccine was to mimic this process. Make the mRNA in a lab, implant it with instructions, send it into your body via shot in your arm, and that would then deliver a message to some cells in your arm. And the instruction that they implanted in the mRNA was to make spike protein, which is, of course, the hallmark of COVID. And the theory was that the body's immune system would see that odd spike protein in your body. It would ramp up its defense systems and attack it. And it worked. And so the idea is that once you get this mRNA-based COVID vaccine, your immune system will be primed and ready and know how to attack COVID if you become exposed.
So, Tom, just so I get it, spike protein is like the bad guy in this situation.
That's the villain
yes.
of COVID.
Yeah, spike protein is essentially the way that COVID would enter your cells. It's the outer coat of the COVID virus. So for the COVID vaccine, scientists said, let's use that unique, quote unquote, bad guy protein, spike protein, as the starting point. And that's not without controversy still 5 years later.
Right.
But the theory was, let's teach the body that the spike protein is the enemy. So like Tom said, what scientists said was, let's send in a recipe for some of the cells to make the spike protein. And the recipe, again, was in the form of the mRNA. That's like the cookbook, right? So we needed to give your body a cookbook just to make the spike protein, but not make all the other horrible parts of the virus. And you remember, you could never get infected with actual COVID because it was just a very small piece of the outer coat. So you remember, you got jabbed in the muscle with the COVID shot. And so in order for the mRNA to make its way into the muscle cells, I mean, this is what took a long time, decades. We needed to figure out how to get it from that syringe into the cell. And so scientists wrapped the mRNA into a lipid nanoparticle. Buzzword, so many people have said, oh my God, now you're putting nanoparticles in my body. This is where that came from. They put the mRNA in an envelope of fat because you need the fat to kind of push through the cell wall. But once inside the mRNA instruction sheet was revealed, your muscle cells, okay, got it. I got the recipe. You want me to pump out spike protein. So it did. And the best thing about it is, because it was a novel virus, your body knew that spike protein does not belong to you. It has never seen that before. And when your body sees something that it has never seen, it says, okay, activate the immune system. I got all these cells. There's an enemy. It's a full-on attack. So your immune system then makes antibodies to the spike protein. And an antibody just attacks something, destroys it, kills it. And there are other cells that help eat it up, like Pac-Man. But your antibody is the first thing that kind of like puts handcuffs on this thing. Your immune system then does all the stuff to neutralize the spike protein. And the best part is, any cell that accidentally got infected with the spike protein, or the virus for that matter. And one of the best things about our immune system is that, unlike our normal brain, it kind of has a photographic memory. That's the whole point of an immune system. That's why you give a vaccine. It's because your body can remember stuff many years later. And so the whole point of this mRNA, and I hate to use the word ploy, but that's the world we're in. The ploy of the mRNA that scientists came up with was that the next time you see the spike protein, as in when you get infected with COVID, your immune system has a head start. It already knows how to make antibodies, and that's where it will prevent you from getting seriously sick. Now, I don't want to get too much into this, but this idea about preventing infection versus, preventing you from getting sick. I mean, every time you get the COVID virus just entering your body, I mean, technically you got infected. But if you have a vaccine that's given you immunity, your body has arms forces ready right away.
Now, as for the mRNA message itself, because this is another huge point of criticism and contention today, you just have to remember that it's fleeting. So that's why scientists got behind this, because it falls apart, it degrades, it dissolves away on its own. So therefore it stops sending these build spike protein instructions over and over and over again. It goes away, it goes kaput. And that's key, because you don't want the body to continually to be making these spike proteins. You want a little, prime the immune system, and then stop.
Yeah, it's like you want to shred the cookbook. We don't need it anymore. Put it in the shredder. We got it. mRNA is not very stable. That's why it took so long to get to this point where we're at. It doesn't last long. So remember, once it's finished making the protein, it's degraded in a matter of days. Now it's important to remember the mRNA entered the cell. Now back to high school biology. The nucleus is the middle of the cell, the core. The outer part of the cell is called the cytoplasm. And the mRNA stays in the outer zone of the cell, the cytoplasm. It does not enter mission control center. It does not enter nucleus. It does not do anything where your DNA is housed. So you cannot alter the DNA.
And that's a huge another point that we'll get to with Dr. Weissman. But that does this enter the DNA? Does it alter the DNA? Not only for yourself, for your offspring. It's a huge point of contention.
So that's what it does. But also amazing is the story of, well, how did we even get to this point where we could figure this out to use mRNA to deliver these instructions in the first place? I mean, it was not easy. mRNA is kind of almost a new kid on the block, if you think about it. It was actually only discovered in the early 1960s. After scientists discovered how the body uses mRNA, it wasn't until the 1980s that they figured out how to actually make mRNA in the lab and to write the instructions that fit inside, which could potentially heal the body. But look, our body, as we know, is no fool, and it can recognize, I mean, it's almost like an imposter mRNA. It's lab made. So this early on, or this synthetic lab generated mRNA, every time we put it in the body, our body was like, no way, I'm going to get rid of this. I don't know what this is. It would attack it and degrade it. There was no time for it to make protein. So there was no way that scientists could send these kinds of instructions into the body. No, thank you, the body would say. That was until two scientists, Katie Carrico and her partner, Drew Weissman, our guest today, found a way. By tweaking the mRNA ever so slightly, the immune system backed down and let that message go through. They figured out how to get the mRNA into the body without it being degraded and destroyed, so it could actually do something.
There's such a wonderful story about how Caitlin Carrico and Drew Weissman met. They actually didn't know each other while they were working at the University of Pennsylvania. And in a classic lab meeting story, they happened to run into each other at a copier machine. They got to talking. Just like that, they started working together. And after their breakthrough, which, as Mark said, was finding a way to create that mRNA message that the body's immune system would not destroy on site, it really took the scientific community years to realize just how profound this finding was and what it could be used for. You know, they have this journey that is so reminiscent of what many in scientists are going through. They struggled to find funding for this, pushing forward despite setbacks. They eventually did secure funding from NIH, later from Pfizer and BioNTech to invest in their work, seeing promise for potential vaccines. And when COVID hit, the world desperately needed a vaccine, and that mRNA technology and platform was ready. So the mechanism was in place. It had been tested. Instead of building a vaccine one of the traditional ways, which could have taken many, many years, all the scientists needed to do was take this mRNA platform and write the specific instructions that would prime the immune system to attack this new virus. In the US, the majority of these vaccinations for COVID ended up being mRNA based. And according to a study by the Commonwealth Fund, their introduction through the end of 2022, which was the worst of the pandemic, those vaccines accounted for preventing 3.2 million American deaths, which is just astounding.
So you think, Maggie, that would be the end of the story, right? Not exactly. We alluded to it already, and we're going to talk to our guest about it. But if you spin around social media, you tap into this torrent of rage and fear, deep sadness, and of course, mistrust about mRNA. And, you know, there's some big points that we'll just touch here, but we'll get into more in our interview. But, you know, the first is that there's a huge population that's kind of existing under the radar who have suffered horrible vaccine injuries from mRNA vaccines, and they're just not being accounted for. You know, we're seeing online, you know, a lot of discussion about, you know, the mRNA instructions were supposed to just affect cells in your arm near where you got the shot, and this caused, you know, chaos to the body, and it threatened these vital organs. You see assertions that the spike proteins, you know, actually did not degrade, did not fall apart, that they're just continuously living on and sending these instructions. So again, a lot to unpack here, but it is a very, very vocal online presence now that is still analyzing mRNA and saying this thing went bad and it's not being talked about.
I mean, I'm just wondering, Mark, like, what do doctors, what do scientists, what do they say when they hear, what's their response to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, and you know, it's asking a lot of questions, and now we're looking for answers and giving answers. I mean, on the speed thing, and you know, brand new, like our guest today, he's going to tell us. I mean, Dr. Weissman, he's been studying mRNA at Penn here in Philly for close to 30 years, and so you know, I don't know that he would call it, you know, warp speed, but the high level response from scientists to all of these kinds of concerns is, one is, let's listen. Let's track them. Let's make sure that we're still keeping our eye on the ball. And the biggest thing that we have to anchor to, scientists say, is to the trials that were done. I mean, the answer is in the data, and we might need more data, and we can keep gathering more data, but it doesn't mean that we discount, all the data that got us to this point. And remember, there were more than 70,000 people in the mRNA COVID vaccine trials by Pfizer and Moderna. And again, prior to that, it had been studied for decades. Plus there's this ongoing pharmacovigilance and post-marketing surveillance. I mean, that is an active process. It's happening right now, which plays a crucial role in monitoring the safety of vaccines once they've been released in large quantities on the world. So our friend Dr. Offit, he often says, like, of course there are going to be issues. The way that works is we have a system to pick them up by continuously assessing adverse events and detecting any real safety signals that may come up. So the overwhelming data says that mRNA vaccines are safe, but that answer still just does not sit well with lots of people. We also hear doctors say, of course, there are always going to be rare adverse reactions from vaccines. And we'll listen to Dr. Weissman a little bit more about that. He's going to get into that, and then we also hear about it not being able to impact your DNA because of where the mRNA goes into the cell. Again, we'll probably ask Dr. Weissman to explain that a little bit more. But, this idea that we have things that can alter our DNA. I mean, we do live in a world where we have things that can alter our DNA. It's just a different set of letters. It's not mRNA. It's another technology. It's called CRISPR, and it does go in and edit DNA and make things that are, life-saving and life-changing. Remember, we heard about this baby that, had this metabolic disorder that was the first baby to be having its genes edited to essentially save its life. But again, it's just not mRNA. And then we're going to put all of these questions directly to Dr. Weissman. And he, is going to bring all of hopefully his expertise from the last 30 years, but also move us into the new world that we're in right now.
Yeah. And so, of course, mRNA has become very political. We know that HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has questioned the safety of this approach. We see that research involving mRNA is being cut. Very recently, we got the news that the U.S. government was canceling the development of a vaccine for bird flu, which is spreading among our dairy cows. And an HHS spokesperson explained the move, saying, quote, "This is simply not about efficacy. It's about safety, integrity, and trust. The reality is that mRNA technology remains under-tested, and we are not going to spend taxpayer dollars repeating the mistakes of the last administration, which concealed legitimate safety concerns from the public." That is the HHS spokesperson speaking for the agency on that matter. And so across America, we're also seeing state legislatures pass bills restricting mRNA vaccines. In fact, in Tennessee, they passed a law that states if you put mRNA vaccine into lettuce that people buy in the supermarket, it has to be labeled a drug. So I did a whole lot of searching. I'm not seeing anybody putting mRNA
why are
vaccine
people putting
in
it in
grocery
lettuce?
store lettuce, but
They're not.
We're prepared if anyone quickly does that.
But looking back, there was no question that public health believes they did a poor job explaining what mRNA vaccines were. At the height of the pandemic, with death spiking in a lot of places, there was a failure to communicate clearly to the public what mRNA vaccines could and what they could not do. And there is this one big point that I don't think got across. And ultimately, a vaccine is like giving your immune cells the play before a game. So they go in, they know how to respond, who they're going to put on the field, and how they're going to defend against the opponent, which is the virus. But no vaccine prevents the game from ever happening. Like Mark said earlier, when a virus gets in, that's an infection. Even if your body controls it and you have no symptoms whatsoever, the virus entered your body. And so to prevent it from ever infecting a cell, that could be sterilizing immunity. And that's really not something that we think about as most of our vaccines today achieving. The goal is different. Preventing disease and preventing a virus from replicating at all are very different metrics. Vaccines can reduce the amount of virus that replicate by giving your immune system that good defense strategy. And the goal is to reduce the disease, not all symptoms, but to keep you alive from an otherwise deadly pathogen. We didn't explain that well.
I want to just nail this point down, because I think I put myself in this category. When a person thinks of a vaccine in this country, up until COVID, I would say, They think of something that when they get it, they don't get the disease that it's meant to fight, right? When you get a polio vaccine, you don't get polio.
Yeah, and I would
when you
just
get the measles vaccine, you don't get measles.
But you don't get infected at all.
Right.
Or do you get infected, but you just don't have the symptoms? Those are two different things.
Let me just, because I think this is really important. For scientists, this nuance that you're saying is, oh, you're actually still getting it. It's just you're not, like, that is not how it's been sold to the public. Vaccines are sold as the thing that prevents the disease. And so this nuance you're talking about in the middle of a deadly pandemic was either not communicated or completely lost. So as a result, you have a large swath of this country who's like, oh, you sold me a lie. You told me that getting a vaccine meant that I wasn't going to get the thing. And then later, clearly, I think you started to have a much more like, no, it's there to prevent severe disease. It's there to prevent hospitalizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think people think that you're putting yourself a bubble around you if you get a vaccine. You're not going to become the boy or the girl in the bubble, right? Like, it just doesn't work that way. And I think we tried several, mechanisms of attack, if you will, on the messaging. Like, right, first it was like, let's just do high level. Then let's just do deep dive. Let's just try to explain the science and let's just try to explain the trial. The bottom line is that the vaccine was to prevent you from getting clinical illness and severe disease. And there was so much nuance lost in the way that message was delivered. It's impossible for your body to, think that it will never be exposed to the COVID virus just because you had the vaccine, right?
And I would say, Mark, it's gotten to the point where you've got people saying, like they did on our podcast this week on Tuesday that dropped, you can't even call the COVID vaccine a vaccine because it doesn't prevent disease.
Right.
That's sounds good. I guess you could think about doing that. But the whole point of a vaccine is to prevent an illness, and you give a medication when you actually have an illness. So, I mean, look, if we want to find a new word, like, let's try it. But, it is still a vaccine. But let's look to the future. Here we are. We are now in a world where companies are now figuring out that, look, we have a problem with this vaccine and the spike protein. Let's start doing something about it. And so now we have websites and wellness centers and companies selling supplements and spike detox proteins. I mean, they market them as immune boosters, inflammation fighters, and tools to clear, the spike protein out of your body. Basically, they want you to do a post-vaccine cleanse. So, yeah, I mean, this is, you can go online, buy a 90-day supply. There are doctors who talk about all the side effects and talking about anecdotally all the patients they've seen, and they have hundreds of patients and they try this and that. So on one side, we have mRNA hailed as this life-saving breakthrough that is being studied not only for COVID, but, for cancer and heart disease and diabetes and genetic conditions and rare autoimmune diseases. And on the other side, there's an entire industry built on the idea that we need to detox from those very same life-saving breakthroughs. Let's just say business is booming on the vaccine side and on the vaccine cleanse side.
Boy, yeah, man, that was just a podcast in and of itself, y'all. But listen, when we come back, we're going to be joined by Dr. Drew Weissman, who shared a Nobel-Prize for his work on mRNA and the COVID vaccine. And boy, do we have a lot to get into with him. So we'll be right back. Okay, we are back, and we are very excited to be joined by Dr. Drew Weissman. Hi.
Hello.
It's so nice to have you. Does anyone ever call you Dr. Drew?
My niece does, and a few other. I prefer Drew.
Yeah, well, because, there is another Dr. Drew. I don't know if you've heard, but you guys are a little different. So look, Dr. Weissman, he is the director of the Institute for RNA Innovation at the University of Pennsylvania. And like we said, he is a 2023 Nobel laureate in medicine for his work in paving the way for the mRNA-based COVID vaccine. And so, Dr. Weissman, we are very excited to welcome you to Why Should I Trust You? So look, I want to start off by reading you a quotation from an HHS spokesperson who, in explaining the decision to cancel the contract with Moderna for the mRNA-based bird flu vaccine, they explain the move by saying, This is not simply about efficacy. It's about safety, integrity, and trust. The reality is that mRNA technology remains under-tested, and we are not going to spend taxpayer dollars repeating the mistakes of the last administration, which concealed legitimate safety concerns from the public. So we want to start with that question because I think it sums up in many ways the moment we're in right now. And as somebody who is in a unique position to talk about mRNA, what goes through your mind when I read you that quote?
So, I mean, I guess I should be used to this, but the continuous lies to further political basis continues to be striking to me. No vaccine has been tested as extensively as the mRNA LNP vaccine. No vaccine has been given safely and effectively to more people than the RNA vaccine. There is no question that this is the safest, most tested vaccine ever.
What's so interesting about this, because it's actually its very safety that is being called into question here. And I think what we'd love to do is to sort of lay out some of the things that people are saying about it and then just kind of get your take. And then at the same time, also just looking ahead to talk about what you believe this is doing to the promise of mRNA for future therapies and future cures. You know, one of the claims, to quote, messenger RNA devised by Pfizer and Moderna has been chemically modified to be unassailable to enzymes in the body to be broken down. So does the mRNA linger for long periods of time, and therefore does it cause problems?
Nope. So that's a lie. What we showed is that by modifying the RNA, it doesn't activate the innate immune system. So what that means is it doesn't trigger inflammation. What that leads to is prolonged protein production because the cells are happy. When you give an unmodified RNA, it makes the cells unhappy. They get inflamed, they activate different pathways, and that shortens the amount of time protein is made. The RNA is completely natural. It's identical to the RNA that's already in your cell. Pseudouridine is the most common nucleoside modification. So there's nothing in the mRNA of that vaccine that's abnormal, that can't be digested by enzymes.
Yeah, I mean, so what you're describing is that you did a small modification just to make the cell not overreact to the mRNA. Now, how long, because everybody's so concerned about the mRNA being so foreign, even though you just described how it's really the same that's in your body, but how long does it stay in your body? The mRNA that, was designed to go in the vaccine, how long does it stay in the body?
So it varies depending on what cells it goes into. Average, it's about a day that the RNA is present in the cell making protein, and then it's gone.
Where does it go?
It's degraded. It's chopped up into little nucleosides, little chemical pieces.
And where do those go?
That they go into the Krebs cycle, they go into energy production, they go to make new molecules, to make new proteins. They're just used like every other protein or nucleic acid that's broken down by the body.
So it's like goes into like a garbage disposal?
Yeah,
exactly.
They're
Like
recycled,
composting for the body.
Okay.
Exactly. We break down all of our proteins and reuse them.
All right. So the mRNA went in. It was supposed to make the spike protein. That was what you decided would be, or I should ask you, is that what you decided was the best target? Like you picked spike protein because...
So that was decided 20 years ago when the SARS-1 epidemic occurred. And at that time, people who were studying coronaviruses, which is the family that SARS-2 is in, learned that the spike protein in a vaccine was protective. For most viruses, the protein on the surface that causes infection is what you target.
So, some of the people who are critical of the vaccine say, look, like you pick spike protein. We've realized it doesn't kind of stay localized. Sometimes it can travel and circulate in the blood. I'm going to read you a quote. The spike protein is found everywhere in the body. 3 studies now show the spike protein is circulating in the blood for 6 to 9 months after people take the shot. This was a statement made in front of Congress. The part of the virus, the lethal part of the virus in the vaccinated, is circulating in the blood, and then they take a booster and they get more. And it's a killer protein. It cannot be safe. It was not safe by design. Why did you pick the spike protein?
So that again is a lie. There have been a few studies. There have been hundreds of others that prove that that's incorrect. Those few studies use suspect assays to measure. So it's kind of like if you have it in your mind to find gold and you go out searching, every rock you find, you're going to say is gold. It isn't. If you have a bad assay that isn't measuring correctly, you can measure spike anywhere you want. It's functionally impossible to have spike protein circulating for months after an RNA vaccine. And hundreds of studies have shown that doesn't happen. Most studies show spike protein doesn't circulate at all.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have what are called single molecule assays that can measure one protein in a volume of solute. Even there, they don't measure circulating spike protein. This is made up nonsense that people use to scare people.
So how do you explain, part of the concern is we now realize that myocarditis, this inflammation of the heart, is a real thing in some people, and that is because of the spike protein, right? So how do you then say, look, it's just dangerous for this very small set, for the rest of us, it's okay?
So what they ignore and they don't tell you is that the risk of myocarditis and cardiac problems is 30 times higher if you get COVID-19 infection.
Right.
So this is a manifestation of the infection itself. All COVID vaccines likely lead to some element of myocarditis in adolescent boys that lasts a day or two, is treated with nonsteroidals and goes away. It is not a serious disease. It is not a threatening disease.
Right.
Compared to the infection where people have serious cardiac effects.
Right, but putting the myocarditis that's caused by the infection of COVID to the side, which it's a higher. I understand it's a higher level than any, and these are so rare to begin with as well than what happens from the COVID vaccine. But just looking at the COVID vaccine and myocarditis, is it because that the spike protein travels through the circulatory system and lands in the heart? Is it because the instructions are being sent to cells that are heart cells? Like, it seems like myocarditis sort of buttresses some of the critiques of this technology, and I'm just curious how you respond to those.
Yeah, so we don't know the mechanism. It's likely not spike protein. What's probably happening is that there's a cross-reactive immune response that's induced by the spike protein, by the coronavirus infection. And that immune response somehow affects myocardial tissue. Again, it's incredibly mild. It's 1 in 100,000 people. Compared to the number of lives saved, it's determined the risk benefit is incredibly on the benefit side. So
Right.
we don't know for sure what the mechanism is, but it's likely just a cross-reactive immune response.
Yes, and again, for the fact that we're seeing this in young men and boys, maybe has something to do with testosterone. Like, there's some other factor that's okay. That's not really sort of germane to what we're talking about here. But let me just run through a couple other ones, just maybe slightly quicker. There is assertions that the mRNA-based COVID vaccines are causing miscarriages.
To be completely honest with you, when the vaccines first came out, I would get phone calls, emails, texts. Half of them related to pregnancy said, you've made me infertile. The other half said, you've made me fertile and I now have children. all of that is anecdotal. And what anecdotal honestly is somebody will say, well, a friend told a friend that the vaccine did this, and I believe it. The original friend likely wasn't telling the truth. And the whole story is a single person who maybe had something happen that maybe was related to the vaccine. The large studies of the billions of people that were injected found no effect on fertility, both pro or con, from the COVID vaccine.
Or miscarriage is what you're saying.
Or miscarriage or at any effects. I mean, early in the pandemic, Israel was purposely vaccinating pregnant women because COVID infection would lead to bad outcomes during pregnancy. And they determined that the vaccine was protective of the newborn children.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on a point that it seems like the conversation has shifted. We've now shifted from the risk benefit. So, like, just again, myocarditis, if you get a natural infection, that virus is all over your body. It's infecting your heart, your lungs, every organ. It's a systemic illness. It's not just a respiratory infection. And, look, that's dangerous. So now we have a vaccine. Let's do it in a more controlled, safer exposure without the live virus. Just let's do a small part. And the risk of myocarditis is much smaller than if you had the natural infection. It seems that like you said, we've forgotten about that. Everybody now is focused on just the safety. And if you can't tell me the vaccine is safe, it's not worth any risk. And safety trumps efficacy. How do you know that what the research you've done proves the vaccine is safe?
So we've got 2+ billion people were vaccinated. We know the safety data from those people. All pharmaceutical companies do phase 4 clinical trials where they follow people after the vaccines are approved and follow them for adverse events. We know that there are 2 adverse events that are definitely linked to the COVID vaccine. One is myocarditis. The other is an anaphylactoid reaction that every vaccine has as an adverse event. Those are the only adverse events that have been linked to the COVID-19 vaccine.
Dr. Weissman, another thing we hear, and we heard it just this week, we did a conversation with some supporters of the MAHA movement, and one of the things that they brought up was the idea of calling the COVID vaccine a vaccine, because in our sort of normal, everyday, just lexicon, a vaccine is something that prevents disease, and the COVID vaccine did not prevent COVID. And so what is your view on that? And does it kind of even matter what we call it in some ways?
Yeah, so there are different kinds of vaccines. What people don't understand is that most vaccines don't prevent infection. They prevent disease, and they prevent severe disease. So the measles vaccine prevents severe disease. If you're exposed to the measles virus, it still infects your cells. The immune system responds quickly enough that it doesn't cause systemic infection. So most vaccines prevent disease. The COVID vaccine, initially, for the first one that was made, it prevented infection. Then the virus started to mutate, started to change. But what we found is that the COVID vaccine prevented severe disease. So in the beginning of the pandemic, I would walk through our intensive care units. Every single bed had an intubated COVID-19 patient in it. Now, the ICUs are empty of COVID patients because the vaccines and prior infection has given people a baseline immunity that protects them from severe disease. The continued vaccines are to maintain that protection from severe disease. So it may not block a mild URI type infection, cold, but it reduces and it prevents severe infection and death.
Right.
You say that the vaccine does that, but a lot of the people who are critical of that say, no, it wasn't the vaccine. It didn't save 3.2 million lives. Other things did. One, everybody got the natural infection, so we had natural immunity. Look, we started giving drugs, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and then finally the virus mutated to a much milder form. So it wasn't really the vaccines that, saved the day. It was all of this other stuff.
Yeah, so none of that is true. Chloroquine and ivermectin had no efficacy for COVID-19 infection. They actually, especially ivermectin, had increased adverse events that put people at risk. Natural immunity certainly helps. The problem is natural immunity is not as good as vaccine-induced immunity, especially for the next virus, the next variant that's coming out.
And can be dangerous.
Well, that's the big fear. I mean, we went from alpha, beta through delta, and then suddenly switched to gamma viruses. The gamma was a completely different virus that made everybody in the world sick again, even people that had the original first virus out there. The fear is that we might have another big switch, and the vaccine will give people immunity if we can find that potential virus in time.
Yeah. Dr. Weissman, I want to just underscore, what it is that we're hearing, and just so we can maybe even try to put ourselves in the shoes of some people who aren't necessarily, trying to just find who aren't bad faith actors, who genuinely, wanted to do the right thing at the time. And, we're nervous about the vaccine. We're being threatened with termination at their places of employment if they didn't take it. And I think the thing that a lot of this country really wrestles with is if they were being sort of punished for not taking something that even if you took it, you could still get the disease. What was this all about? Why couldn't we live in a world where there was much more nuance in the conversation about what this vaccine could and couldn't do? And to get to your point about measles, I mean, measles was declared eradicated in this country in the year 2000 because people weren't getting it. So this idea that it only reduces severe disease and not your ability of your body to get infected, I think is not something that's felt by people, even if the science supports that. It's not the message that goes out. What goes through your mind when I say that?
Yeah, so I wasn't in complete agreement with the vaccination policies that occurred after the pandemic for hospitals, for nursing homes, for places where people who are immunosuppressed, immunodeficient, not great immune systems due to age or other reasons. Those situations, I believe everybody needs to be vaccinated. So what America has forgotten, and it's part of this American ethos of we're better than the rest of the world, is we don't only vaccinate to protect ourselves. We vaccinate to protect our parents, our grandparents, our children, all of the immune suppressed, all the people with rheumatoid diseases or with cancer. We're vaccinating to protect them. So when somebody says, I won't get the vaccine because I don't think I'll ever get sick, I'm too healthy, my argument is always, well, what about your parents? What about your grandparents? What are you doing to protect them?
I wonder if you might just enlighten us on what other things this approach can be used for beyond vaccination.
So the potential for RNA is enormous. And we're already seeing this in clinical trials. We've had numerous, and I mean many, clinical trials for genetic deficiencies. The latest one, I guess it was about 3 weeks ago out of CHOP, Kiran Musunuru, treated a young child with a genetic deficiency that would have killed them with RNA LNPs and a gene editing technology and cured this child. That's the first in what will hopefully be many different cures. There's been multiple other gene therapies that in phase 1 clinical trials look like they've been cured. We've had 2 cancer vaccines that have already shown efficacy. one for melanoma, one for pancreatic cancer. What people don't understand about pancreatic cancer is that it's almost always found very late, and there is no good treatment for it. It has a mortality rate of less than 10% at 5 years. And the 10% who survive are for other reasons. This vaccine had 25% efficacy in a first try clinical trial. We have autoimmune diseases that are in clinical trials right now, where instead of giving people immunosuppressive drugs, that tone down their symptoms a little. This cures them. It gets rid of the autoimmune disease. So we've got a trial of sickle cell anemia cure that a single injection will be able to cure sickle cell anemia. The list goes on for all of the potential.
Drew, that's amazing. That breaks my brain a little bit to think about. These are chronic conditions. These are all things that, the Make America Healthy Again movement would want to rally around, a cure for autoimmune diseases, for cancers that had no other treatment, and potentially with one injection versus, a consistent infusion or several medications that you're taking regularly. And so,
No, I mean, I just wanted to make a distinction here because what you're saying is so promising for so many diseases. I mean, melanoma, pancreatic cancer, but you're not saying that we're altering the DNA. We're just boosting or providing a treatment. So mRNA can be used as a vaccine to prevent disease, but it can also be used to give, instructions to your body to make a protein that, say, your body isn't just capable of making, right?
No, exactly. You brought up another major thorn in RNA's side, which is the idea that the RNA can alter a person's DNA. It can't. The RNA doesn't go into the nucleus. It doesn't have any of those activities. The other is our Surgeon General from Florida is claiming that DNA causes cancer and RNA vaccines contain DNA. The only problem is the FDA has limits on amount of DNA. Every single vaccine that's made from any kind of virus, grown in cells, grown in eggs, they all contain DNA. It's a contaminant that's made from cells. They all have incredibly low amounts. Nobody has ever accused them of causing cancer before. This is just a hypocritical attack on RNA because the FDA says you can have this amount of DNA.
just to clarify, Drew, DNA or RNA, when it's injected into your arm, it's not incorporating into your own genome in any of your cells.
It cannot. It's functionally impossible.
Let's stick with Maha and our new Secretary of HHS. There is an online petition that's circulating right now among some in Maha saying, quote, removal of the mRNA platform from the market is one of the main goals of the grassroots Maha movement. We've sort of looked at that and are wondering if all of gene therapy now is under threat, that it's being attached to the mRNA-based vaccines, which, judge and jury among many in the Maha community is that was a disaster. So is that bleeding over into gene therapy? And sort of looking at sort of what we're seeing online, RFK Jr., came out with his top team after a big gene therapy conference last week and released a video in which they tried to buttress or tried to support gene therapy, saying, Maha community, this is something that you want in your life. And let's just play that soundbite and then we'll get your reaction.
Part of the purpose of this was to assure the community that we are absolutely committed to keeping the United States as the hub of the world of biomedical research. Under our leadership, we're going to make sure the United States of America is the center, remains the center for cell and gene therapy research, for biomedical research in the globe. We also understand that this kind of research is absolutely consistent with the Maha agenda These are technologies that cure disease. We need to move away from the sick care model where we are treating chronic disease over the lifetime of the patient and actually cure disease and make people better again.
So what are you hearing in that? I mean, we've talked a lot about this fire that's raging right now of anger and fear and revulsion towards the mRNA vaccine, but yet this is RFK Jr. now saying, "Hold the line, gene therapy is okay." I mean, what do you hear when you hear that soundbite?
Yeah, I hear so many levels of hypocrisy. It's hard to put them together. So the future of gene therapy is going to be RNA based. That's because prior to RNA, it was viral based. It was using lentiviruses. These are viruses related to HIV that integrate into the DNA. Or it was using adeno-associated viruses that rarely integrate but sit in a cell for years. People, especially Kennedy and his prior to RNA, were against any viral delivery of gene therapy. Now he's given that up because he's found a bigger thing to attack, which is RNA. Most of the RNA therapies that are going forward right now, gene therapies, are RNA based. They're safer, they're easier, they're cheaper than viral based therapies.
Dr. Weissman, one of the other, just to move the conversation a little bit in a different direction, one of the other criticisms that we hear a lot about are the financial conflicts of interest and how Pfizer and Moderna have made lots of money because of this vaccine. We spoke in the past and I've interviewed you before, and I think you told me that, you've been working on this for close to 30 years in some capacity. Obviously, things changed more recently, and that you actually had a patent and you licensed your patent out so that the companies could use this technology to create the vaccine. Can you walk us through the financial maze that is from lab to research to licensing, vaccine, and what kind of conflicts do you have as the inventor of this vaccine?
So I'm happy to do that. I guess I'm confused because I thought in Trump's America, capitalism and making money was the supreme goal. I mean, he had the richest man in the world as his sidekick. In medical research, you develop new ideas, new therapeutics, new approaches. You patent those because the university requires that. If you're lucky enough that somebody licensed your patent, you get a share of the royalties from any drug, vaccine, therapeutic that's made from it. So Penn received royalties. Katie and I got a small portion of that. That certainly didn't affect our generation invention of the RNA vaccine. It occurred after the vaccine was released. So there was no potential conflict to making this vaccine. You could argue now that my views on RNA vaccines may be biased because I get royalties. Unfortunately, the royalties have stopped because the patent is over. So all of the work I'm doing going forward, I get no royalties, no money from, and it's purely scientific development.
How is the patent over so soon?
20 years. So, Katie and I made the discovery in 2005.
So
Operation Warp Speed, huh?
yeah.
Drew, I remember when we talked on the phone, you said that when you sometimes address pharmaceutical companies, there's something you say that sometimes they don't love.
Certainly. So I always have to be careful what group I'm saying this to, but I have a vision of the future where potentially, so we can make RNA vaccines right now that have 20 different RNAs. So that's 20 different antigens. There are 18 childhood vaccines that are commonly given right now. Potentially, in the future, we could give kids an RNA vaccine at 1 month, 6 months, maybe 2 years and 5 years. and cover every childhood vaccination that's currently recommended. I don't know about the schedule. I don't know, can we fit all of them into one vaccine? But even if it's two, we're going to cut down the number of vaccinations, the every 3 months to the doctor that moms and dads go through right now. That's my vision of the future.
What do you think the pharmaceutical industry hears when you mention that?
Oh, well, vaccines don't make them much money to begin with, and now we're going to get rid of what little money they've got left. So they can't be too happy with it.
Do you see that as a future in the current landscape that we're in? Is that with this type of approach that, look, we give kids too many shots, and, why are we giving our poor little babies so many shots? Is that, in that's the Maha take? Is this the mRNA take? Is we give kids too many shots? Let's decrease the number of shots. I mean, is that something that you could find a way to work with the current administration on?
So I think it's likely to occur in China because China is putting the money and the effort behind developing RNA technology. I don't know if Maha would ever trade their hatred of RNA for their hatred of too many shots. So I'm certainly happy to talk to them and discuss this with them and see if it's a potential. I just don't know if they can get over it.
Well, I'll tell you, we'd be happy to help broker that conversation because from what we hear, the number of shots and the childhood vaccine schedule is repeatedly brought up as the thing that worries so many moms and dads out there. So if you're telling me the guy that they maybe kind of throw some zingers at these days is also the guy that may lower the number of shots, like, I don't know. We're in interesting times, Drew. There's strange bedfellows everywhere, and it may be a path forward.
We heard news yesterday that, there's been a change in, how vaccines may, get approved. For example, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices that makes recommendations on the safety, efficacy, and clinical need for vaccines. Yesterday, Secretary Kennedy in an op-ed announced that he was going to replace all of those people and got rid of all 17 of those people. Those people brought to the table independent expertise about not just your vaccine, but many vaccines. What does the future of the mRNA vaccine look like with this change?
So I'm afraid about the future of all vaccines. We don't know who Kennedy is going to select to replace those experts. When you replace the head of the FDA, when you replace Sieber at the FDA, he put his anti-vaccine cronies in those positions. My fear is he's going to find 17 or however many experts, anti-vaccine people or vaccine skeptical people, and future vaccines, including cancer vaccines, rheumatoid arthritis, and other rheumatoid disease vaccines, are all going to have trouble being approved. I just don't know. I need to see who he selects.
Can you talk to our listeners who come to this conversation deeply, deeply concerned about this technology? What would you say to them to gain their trust in this moment? What would you say to them that would reassure them, based on all of your years of scientific research, that this is a good thing and not something to be feared?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very long conversation. I think what people have to realize is that the RNA vaccine is mostly natural material. The RNA is completely natural. It's identical to the RNA that's in your cells. 2 of the 4 lipids in the lipid nanoparticle are completely natural in your cells. So there's very little foreign material, unlike most other vaccines that include an inactivated influenza virus or a protein purified from bacteria. This is an incredibly physiologic, natural vaccine. It's been tested in billions of people and shown to be incredibly safe. You have to be careful of the anecdotal comments. These are coming from people who hate RNA for whatever reasons. And we don't fully understand why RNA has come under such fire. I suspect because it's new and because it turned the pandemic around, made it a good target. But the shown safety in the world is incredibly high. It's the safest vaccine ever made. It's now being used for incredibly difficult diseases that all other vaccines have failed, like melanoma, like pancreatic cancer, like gene therapy for young children. These are all incredible advances made possible by mRNA. And I'm happy to talk to people offline to convince them how safe RNA is, to give them the real data and not the social media stories that people spread to try and attack something.
Yeah, Dr. Weissman, I think, in closing here, I just want to reflect a few things that we hear, because I think it's important in this moment that, yes, some of it is absolutely, amplified through sensationalism online, but sometimes, and I think you would be the first to say this, that like vaccines, as effective as they can be, and even as safe as they generally can be, there are vaccine injuries. We have a system to report those. And there are families out there who want their stories heard. They don't necessarily, immediately go to a place of accusation and darkness, but they will if they're not being heard. And that's one thing that I would just share with you and your team, is to just be able to listen to some folks who are experiencing something that they weren't that they didn't sign up for, but are also really open to vaccines, that they're not kind of anti-vax folks, but that they just want people to hear what their experience was with it. And, I think they would love to share some of those stories with you if you're open to just a bigger conversation about this vaccine.
So I have people continuously emailing me and texting me about their stories, and I respond to just about all of them. What you have to remember is the head of the HHS believes in a study by Andrew Wakefield that measles vaccine causes autism. That was a study of, I think, 13 people that was determined to be fake. The real reason he published that paper is he had made his own measles vaccine that hadn't been accepted and approved. And he was trying to kill the approved measles vaccine to get his vaccine accepted. So he lost his license. That's what our Maha leader believes in. And that's where his hatred comes from. A lot of things happen around the time that people are vaccinated. My favorite story was one from Norway early in the pandemic, where there was a sudden outcry where a nursing home had received the COVID vaccine. And within a month, 20 people had died. And everybody started screaming, oh, the COVID vaccine is killing people. And then they did the study. And they went to another nursing home of similar size, similar characteristics, that hadn't received the COVID vaccine, and over 20 people had died. And the conclusion was things happen around the time of vaccines. Whether it's due to the vaccine or not is a complicated thing to determine. So I listen to everybody's stories, and I try to see what is vaccine related and what is vaccine unrelated.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And I'll just say, just on a personal note, as someone who's I lost my father to pancreatic cancer, when I hear that you're working on something that has potential to prevent someone from experiencing that kind of loss, I will say, if that makes me biased, I'm biased. I want you guys to find a cure to pancreatic cancer. I think I said this to you on a call once, Drew, which is like, whatever the legacy is of the COVID vaccine, I know, of course, so many people are grateful for it. Even if a lot of people are very worried about it, I'd like to think that we may be able to look ahead, work on the trust building that needs to be done to work ahead. But the idea that something out there could potentially treat cancer, like, we got to be all in on that as a society. Like, fuck the divisions, excuse my French, but we got to figure out a way, you know, even with our concerns, even with our doubt, to want to make that happen. And so I just, you know, I thank you for what you've done. I thank you for joining us on the show, you know, Dr. Drew, the new Dr. Drew. And I sure hope, you know, you'll take us up on the offer to maybe speak with some folks. We have been doing that, and I think it could be a really interesting experience. So again, thank you for joining us, Drew Weissman.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that is the Why Should I Trust You podcast for today. I am Brenda. He is Tom Johnson. He's Dr. Mark, and she is Maggie Bartlett. Please send us comments, questions to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net, and we will see you right back here next week.